Welcome, everyone, to the Economic Club of Florida's 589th meeting of our Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Christopher Emanuel, and I've got the privilege of serving as the club president this year. And it is my honor to call the meeting to order. Before we begin, I'd like to request everyone that's got a device that buzzes or beeps to put it on silent or stun. And if you would join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and then standing a little bit longer afterwards for a moment of silence, we'll begin with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice as all. If you would remain standing for just a moment more, everyone in this room knows that our community suffered a terrible tragedy last week. The FSU community, the Airmark community, and the Tallahassee community stand in solidarity. And if you would join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. To get our meeting into proper posture, I would like to introduce you to the head table briefly. I'm joined with Barney Bishop. He's the past chair of the club. He's been a business association head, a chief lobbyist, and media commentator, and he's known to many in the club. And in a moment, he will introduce our speaker, Scott McPherson. Mr. McPherson has a distinguished career in public service in the IT sectors before the Florida legislature, and we're excited to hear his perspective and have Barney introduce him in just a moment. At this time, I'd like to recognize the trustee members of our club. These are folks that spend additional capital and resources to invest in our club to ensure our sustainability. Trustees, if you would please stand and be recognized. And now, as our tradition, we're going to go around the room and introduce any guests that we have. We're going to start at my right, y'all's left. Any guests over here? Yeah. Any guests back there?
Hub is well represented today. I hope Reese, who is in charge of benefits for benefit manager for benefits.
Welcome. Any guests over here? All right, before we introduce, oh, pardon me. We'd like to add this is totally Thank you for joining. Quick thank you. Capital Health Plan is the sponsor of today's luncheon series. We could not do what we do here at the Economic Club of Florida without the generous support of businesses like Capital Health Plan. Everyone knows the economics of food and resources right now in 2025, and we're thrilled that businesses continue to invest in bringing distinguished speakers and encouraging collaborative conversations in our community. To that end, I'd like to make one quick announcement. Our board over this summer is going to take some time to think about what the future of this club could look like over the next 5 years. And of course, we need your input. We would love for you to grab a board member or volunteer yourself to become a board member. We would love that. We're the ones with the ribbons. If you'd come and talk to us a little bit about what you like about the Economic Club, what you'd like to see changed, what opportunities we can to have this club continue to grow and thrive in our community. We are thrilled to have a place where people can have in-depth conversations, have civil discourse, and learn a little bit more about this complicated world. We certainly appreciate the time that you spend here in our lunch series. We certainly appreciate the conversations that happen here. Dr. Jones, would you like to join us? And we're trying to figure out the best model to serve our community. So if you would, over this summer, give us an opportunity to hear your thoughts. It is my privilege at this time to introduce Dr. Lynn Jones. She is the Chief Medical Officer at Capital Health Plan. And as we mentioned earlier, Capital Health Plan has invested in us and in this speaker series to bring these kind of conversations to the community. And we really appreciate that. Dr. Jones, if you'd like, you're welcome to give any remarks to the club.
Okay.
Well, and I see our board chairs here as well, Mr. Boutwell. I just wanted to recognize him. So I think that probably most of the folks here are familiar with Capital Health Plan, at least peripherally, and some of you may even be members. We've been here serving the community for over 40 years. We are Tallahassee's first HMO, and we opened in 1982, and we've been serving thousands of businesses and organizations that rely on CHP for healthcare delivery. And it seems like a perfect fit with today's topic that's going to be discussed. And we're rooted in the community. We not only are a health plan, but also provide healthcare services to the community. We have almost 500 employees, so we're a big part of the community. And then we also serve over 130,000 members within our 9-county service area. And a big part of our service is not only working with community providers, but we also have 3 state-of-the-art health centers that are exclusive for Capital Health Plan members. And we have over 20 employed primary care physicians. So in that sense, Capital Health Plan is able to give our members a wider selection for primary care. And along with our primary care group, and that's the support they provide, we're able to produce top results on measures of clinical care, member satisfaction, and affordability. So our vision for Capital Health Plan is to be a nationally recognized quality leader, to be locally trusted, and provide affordable care. May or may not be aware that Capital Health Plan, unlike some other health plans, we're not for profit. And really we exist to improve the health of our communities by providing high quality, comprehensive health plans with low administrative costs through primary care focused, patient-centered healthcare. And so there's multiple ways that we help impact the economy of the local area. So I'd already mentioned the investment we've made to have our 3 local health centers. We have local employees, and then our mission is to provide high quality care at a lower cost, and that we've been able to maintain lower premiums for businesses. So that means lower costs for businesses that have Capital Health Plan, as well as for employees who would have lower premiums, and in that sense be able to have more leftover, hopefully, money that they can spend in the local economy. Our main values continue to be to provide excellent customer service, to always be working on continuous improvement, teamwork, and always high performance and dedicated to excellence. So CHP, I think sometimes that In general, capital health plan, we're very modest, but we have been consistently recognized as one of the highest rated commercial and Medicare HMOs this past year by the NCQA, which is the National Committee on Quality Assurance. We were rated 4.5 out of 5 stars for commercial and Medicare, and that made us the highest rated plans in the state of Florida. There were no 5-star plans for the state of Florida, and there were actually no other even 4.5-star plans, and we're very proud of that. So, and then we also have a strong commitment to community benefit, and we mainly focused on 3 areas with that, which is addressing and trying to fill gaps for the uninsured and underinsured, promoting community health by pursuing strategies that impact the health of the entire community. And then also we're involved with clinical training and research with our local educational institutions. And many of our employed providers are also professors for Florida State University. Our nurses also work with Florida State University in teaching, as well as Tallahassee State College. And we're working on a partnership with FAMU, developing a program to work with their pharmacy program. So I think the biggest benefit for CHP is that we're local, we're here, our employees are your friends and neighbors, and we want to deliver the best service at the lowest cost with the best results for this community. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Jones, for your sponsorship and for those remarks. Before I turn it over to Barney to introduce our speaker, I've got a couple quick emails that I'd like y'all to be on the lookout for. We're thrilled to have Gregory Hale. He's the chair of the Atlanta Federal Reserve coming to Tallahassee on May 22nd. That should already be in your inbox. We also have the president of the Florida Bankers Association, Kathy Carragher, who is going to be here on June 26th. That should be in your email as well. And we will also probably have a survey coming out in the next month or two on what you like about the Economic Club and how we can improve it for you over the years to come. We're looking forward to getting board feedback as we figure out how to arrange this club for success in the years to come. With that, I would like to introduce our former chair, Barney Bishop.
Okay, I'd like to just take a point of personal privilege here for just a moment and properly recognize the extraordinary gentleman that we all know, who's the visionary. He's been the founding chairman of CHP since 1982, still the chairman, Ken Boutwell, one of our own members. So let's give Ken a. So good afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce our speaker today, someone that I've been lucky enough to know for over 20 years. Scott McPherson is a native Floridian. He's a rare combination of a former politician who is also a computer nerd in the best sense of the word, and now a respected thought leader around the country on a subject matter unrelated to anything that he has ever accomplished before. At the tender age of 25, he became a dragon slayer when he was elected to the State House of Representatives from South Miami-Dade County, defeating a 2-term incumbent. In fact, we have today, I think, Jim Brody, who served in the House. Jim, will you raise your hand? Jim served in the legislature with Scott. So Jim, happy to have you here again today. But what truly has made Scott so remarkable was that at a time when none of us knew anything about these newfangled machines called computers back in the 80s and the 90s, Scott had self-taught himself everything there was to know, from writing code to programming. And in fact, he was so knowledgeable that he authored a weekly column called The Help Screen for Night Ridley newspapers, and it ran for years, and it ran from coast to coast. In 1995, the Republican Party of Florida was smart enough to hire Scott to become their CIO, Chief Information Officer, and he ran their IT, their data collection, software production, and GIS efforts that helped then Representative Daniel Webster in 1996, the next year, to become the first Republican House leader in 122 years. Now, fast forward to 1999, and many of us are going to remember the Y2K computer scare that foretold of apocalyptic scenarios like planes falling out of the air, hospitals collapsing, and all business operations coming to a grinding halt, because to save money and space, early programmers only put the date in the computer as the last two digits. So what would happen when computers rolled over to January 1, 2000? Well, Governor Jeb Bush, who was then the Uber governor, IT governor for our state, was concerned enough that he hired Scott away from the party to oversee all of the state of Florida's preparedness efforts, called Team Florida 2000. And at the time, it was the largest IT project in Florida history. And of course, on midnight on December 31st, 1999 rolled by, we all held our collective breaths, but Florida's IT infrastructure remained secure and performed flawlessly. Consequently, Florida's efforts were recognized nationally as a best practice, and credit goes to Scott and his team that made that happen. He continued in state government and eventually became naturally the Chief Information Officer for the Florida House. And he held that job for 16 years until he retired just recently in 2022. In recognition of his extraordinary technological skills, he received the inaugural Florida CIO Hall of Fame Award from Public CIO magazine. And in 2008, he was recognized by Government Technology magazine as one of the top 25 public technology movers and shakers in the entire United States. I share all of this computer background with you because how does one jump from being a computer geek to becoming an acknowledged national expert on influenza pandemics? The only way that I can rationalize it is that someone who has the ability to teach himself how to think and work like a computer can become an expert on anything if they put their mind to it. And trust me when I say that Scott is an expert on flu pandemics. He began lecturing back in 2009, just prior to that year's H1N1 outbreak. He lectured Fortune 100 chief executives about remote teleworking years before COVID-19 came around. He has lectured all across the country, and he was, I'm told, invited by the Central Intelligence Agency to brief them on influenza pandemics so that they could be prepared for when it happens. Scott now serves as a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government, and today he's going to share with us a sanitized version of what he told the CIA. Let's give him a warm welcome to Scott McPherson.
Well, that's all the time we have, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take questions now. Thank you, Barney, for that introduction. Going back to Y2K, there's somebody I want to recognize. Glenn Main, stand up, please. You all know Glenn, I'm sure. Let's give him a round of applause. When Jeb brought me in January of '99 and said, Scooter, we need you to work on Y2K. Actually, he came into my office at the party in July of '98 and said, Scooter, what's Y2K? And I started briefing him on that. I worked very closely with Glenn. Glenn was the head of the group that got state government systems Y2K compliant, and you did a magnificent job. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. And those of you who know Glenn know that he is quite the character, and he is full of Southern colloquialisms, such as, you try to do that, it's like sneaking sunrise past a rooster, and things of that nature, which I've always remembered, and I just admire you greatly, Glenn. You did such a great job during that. There were going to be problems. For example, drawbridges were going to be stuck in the position they were at 11:59:59 because the software was not Y2K compliant. But I must tell you very briefly, the Lieutenant Governor at the time, Frank Brigham, stayed in the Emergency Operations Center for about 5 hours, sitting, like Captain Kirk in the chair, waiting for something bad to happen. We knew, when Lagos and Rome didn't experience problems, so we knew we were probably going to be hunky-dory. But still, the countdown came, and the Lieutenant Governor was getting tense. Those of you who know Frank Brogan know he's he has kittens sometimes, and so I beckoned over a woman who was working for Joe Myers, who was running emergency management at the time, and I was like, so she backs up to a bank of light switches in the back of the Emergency Operations Center. 3, 2, 1, thump. The whole room went dark. Lieutenant Governor had a fit. And please feel free to tell him who was behind that joke if he doesn't know that already. But Y2K is important for this particular story because in early February of 2006, when Barney was running Associated Industries, I went to see him. We were going to plot, scheme, and connive, and we successfully, I might add. And at the end of that, Barney says, "Hey, you're going to the big bird flu thing at the Civic Center in a couple of weeks." And I said, "What?" And he said, "No. You need trust me. You did Y2K. You did cybersecurity. You need to go and see this." And I said, "What's it about?" And he said, "Pandemic influenza." And I said, "Are you sick?" And he says, "No, trust me. Go to hhs.gov, fill out the form, go." So I did, and I went, and I'm in the bottom of the Civic Center, and Jeb was a keynote speaker, Governor Mike Leavitt, who was HHS Secretary, Dr. Julie Gerberding, who I will always love dearly for reasons you'll know in a few moments, and some other people, and I'm hearing 2.5 million dead, 2.5% case fatality rate, the end of the world as we know it kind of thing. And a guy who worked in Chuck Hagan, who worked for Joe Myers, came up to me, elbowed me in the ribs, and said, "Just like old times, huh, buddy?" And I thought for a moment, and I said, "This is going to be like Y2K, where the people fail instead of the computers." And I said, "We are not prepared for this." So I went up to 35,000 feet to see who was looking at this issue from a holistic statewide or national perspective, and I didn't see very many people up there who were doing that. And I said, "Well, the effect is the same, the stimulus is different. Let's start to learn about this." And I started reading everything I could read. And part of my MO whenever I do something is I find out who the nation's leading experts are and convince them to give me free advice when I need it. And the first person I reached out to was Dr. Michael Osterholm, who many of you will recognize from the Sunday morning news shows. Mike is a great friend, and so I reached out to him. He's the head of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, and he started giving me free advice, and reached out to Dr. Harvey Feinberg, who used to be the provost at Harvard and ran the medical school, and wrote the definitive story on the 1976 swine flu scare, if you remember that, with Gerald Ford and, Chevy Chase with the syringe in his arm during Saturday Night Live and all of that. Dr. Gregory Poland, who was the head of vaccinology at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, who, by the way, lives in Naples and commutes. So he is a Floridian. And Dr. Richard Webby, who is the #2 man for influenza at St. Jude Research Hospital in Memphis. By the way, probably the top influenza research lab in the world, because influenza is a childhood disease by definition. And he works under the Pope of influenza, Dr. Robert Webster, who will also factor in just a moment. So those are some of my mentors. Those are some of the people who I've reached out to over the last 19 years. So we're going to talk quickly about pandemic history. previous pandemics, and also looking at what you and your organization and your family should be looking at doing. Now, a severe flu pandemic is by no means certain, but you read the headlines, you see what's going on. We had the issues back in the mid-2000s where we thought this thing was going to go bad, and I'm talking about H5N1. So we need to, especially considering what we just wrapped up in terms of COVID, which we're still experiencing today, we need to be aware, we need to have situational awareness, and we need to also understand the bug. So influenza, by the way, my first speech I ever gave as a candidate, I was 24, and I spoke to the Toastmaster Club of Coral Gables. And when I was done, I asked for questions, and they critiqued me. And so with MDs in the crowd, I will ask for their critique at the end of the presentation. Influenza is a virus. It's not a bacteria. It's not evil spirits. It's a virus. So small that science even questions whether it's a life form or not. So we know about seasonal flu. There are actually now 4 types of influenza. There's influenza A. If you remember A as an avian, all influenza A came from birds, comes from birds originally. You have influenza B, which is a human virus. You have influenza C, which is similar to the cold, and influenza D, I got no idea. This is a cross-section of an influenza particle. You see the 2 things, hemagglutinin, or the H, and the neuraminidase, or the N. So you have H1N1, H3N2, H2N2, H5N1. And I'm going to give you a demonstration on how you contract influenza. This could either be your nasal passages, your throat, or in the case of H5N1, your lungs. This is an influenza particle, and that's how it works. The hemagglutinin actually sticks to the cell and opens the cell up. The particle goes in. You see those things that look like coil springs in the center? Those are 8 strands of ribonucleic acid, and they start doing their thing in what I call virus palooza. They start going nuts and reproducing, making bad copies of themselves. And because it's RNA, it doesn't have the DNA double helix quality control. And then all of a sudden, somebody blows a whistle and they say, okay, reassemble and let's get the heck out of here. But close back up again. So like a mime, it's trying to get out of the cell wall. That's where neuraminidase comes in, the green and red sucker there. That reopens the cell wall, and the virus particles, thousands of them, stream out of the host cell and do their business. And this goes on and on and on until about 3 days later, you don't feel so good. And that is when you reach the saturation point, the tipping point, and you know you've got the flu. So a pandemic is when a pandemic of anything, of any kind of a bug, occurs when there's no resistance in the general population, very little. It occurs simultaneously worldwide, and we really don't have the capability to deal with it. The 1918 flu pandemic, or the so-called Spanish flu, was probably the best known example of a severe influenza pandemic. But other pandemics include obviously what we just went through, SARS-CoV-2 or COVID. How many saw the movie Awakenings? That was a great film, great book, and that was actually encephalitis lethargica, which was a direct byproduct of the 1918 flu pandemic. And of course, HIV/AIDS, which is a pandemic, even though it's not airborne, it is considered a pandemic because there's still there are treatments now, but there's no cure per se, and it's everywhere. Other pandemic candidates, the OG SARS, which was 2003. By the way, the only reason why SARS did not become a pandemic was because you didn't shed the virus until you felt bad. So if you may have contracted the bug, but you weren't shedding the bug until you knew that you were incredibly sick. That is what saved the world from a SARS pandemic in 2003. By the way, the case fatality rate for SARS, the OG, was 9%. The Nipah virus, how many of you saw the movie Contagion? Hyper accurate representation of a severe pandemic. Dr. Osterholm was an advisor on that film. And so if you've seen Contagion, you get an idea what the worst case scenario could be. The only reason why Ebola has not gone pandemic, quite honestly, is that that the bug kills people so quickly it can't get out. There, a couple times back a few years ago, it went into some of the larger cities in Nigeria, but by and large, it just works too efficiently. And the goal of a bug really is coexistence. You know, it doesn't want to do what Ebola does, which is kill you too quick. Adenovirus 14. Well, golly, gee whiz, measles right now. We know what's going on with that. And then in certain sections of the world, polio. SARS-CoV-2 versus influenza. Coronaviruses are mutating fools. They just mutate every 4 months on average. And that's why it was so difficult for science to try to come up with an effective treatment for SARS-CoV-2. Influenza mutates a little bit more slowly. You know, the problem with calling the COVID vaccine a vaccine is that traditional vaccines not only inoculate you against the bug, but prevent you from passing the bug. But the mRNA vaccines really did not exhibit the ability to prevent you from shedding the virus. And that's a difference between an mRNA vaccine. Also, there's some anecdotal stories about the long COVID side effect, which may or may not have been connected with mRNA. But we know much more about influenza than we did about coronaviruses, much more. In fact, we've been preparing for H5N1 since 2005, when George W. Bush was given an advanced copy of Professor John Barry's book, The Great Influenza. He read it, and it shook him to the core. He called a cabinet meeting. He said, we got to get busy. And that begat the National Strategy for Pandemic Influenza. Copies in my office at home. And he started moving the country into a war footing against a disease. What do you need to have a pandemic? You got to have a novel subtype of influenza where nobody's immune, or very few people are immune. The ability of the virus to continue to replicate and cause disease among us, and then efficient spread from person to person. Here are some of the pandemics we have had over the past 300 years in influenza. You see, we start in Connecticut. Now, they didn't know it was flu. They called it grip, or they thought it was evil spirits, or some kind of vapor or whatever. It wasn't really until in the 40s when we really understood that influenza was indeed a virus. But you can see the pandemics that we have gone through. And you also notice that most pandemics start in the spring and summer, counterintuitive to seasonal flu, which hits us in the fall and winter. So if you were born before 1918, anybody here born before 1918? You went through 6 pandemics. You can do the math there. 57, the H2N2, 1968's H3N2. By the way, H1N1 and H3N2 are still with us. You know, the AIDS pandemic, and then 2009, the H1N1V, and then, of course, SARS-CoV-2. These some photographs of the 1918 pandemic. You know, they call it the Spanish flu because we were in World War I, and the Allies called it the German flu, and the Germans called it the English flu, and Spain was neutral. That's a true story. That's absolutely a true story, how it was named the Spanish flu. So it's believed to have started in a farm in rural Kansas in the spring of 18, spread to a fort, and then the doughboys went off to war and took the bug with them. It got stronger in the trenches and the foxholes of World War I, and then the second wave was the bad one. That's the one that killed almost all the World War deaths in just a matter of weeks. So what do we do today? The World Health Organization has 45 locations where they monitor for influenza. This isn't just bird flu, this is all influenzas. And the Organization for Animal Health, or the OIE, also tests swine and bird samples. And the state and local principalities are on this, especially considering what's going on right now. You have a Saffir-Simpson scale for I know we can all relate to Saffir-Simpson for hurricanes. You have a Saffir-Simpson type scale for pandemic severity. SARS-CoV-2 was a category 4 because we lost 1.1 million Americans, but there is a category 5. The 1918 pandemic would have qualified as a category 5 pandemic, and that's the one that, quite honestly, we need to be preparing for. I want to give a shout out. Anybody know who this woman is? It's Dr. Margaret Chan, who was the former head of the World Health Organization. But in 1997, you remember when Britain was handing Hong Kong off to China, right about that. I think it was New Year's Day, 98, if I remember correctly. And the first cases, the first known in global history, the first documented cases of H5N1 in humans was in late 97. They had 16 cases and 9 deaths in a matter of days. This was going to go pandemic. And Dr. Margaret Chan, under threat of execution by the incoming Chinese Communist government, said, we're going to kill every wild bird in Hong Kong and the surrounding area. The Chinese government let her do her thing, and she eradicated what would have been a devastating pandemic. So just remember Dr. Margaret Chan. Today, we've had issues with bird flu. So how many remember a few years ago when the big speculation was we weren't going to have turkeys for Thanksgiving? Do you remember that? Because of H5N1 bird flu. So they were able to get around that. But this is a situation right now in the United States of America with cattle. There is H5N1 in cattle in a bad way. And the problem is that not only does it affect beef cattle, but it also especially affects dairy cattle. You see, my friend Dr. Webby there has authored a piece on this. They are detecting H5N1 bird flu in cow's milk. And this is a very disconcerting thing. I don't know how many of you don't have to raise your hand, drink raw milk, unpasteurized milk. Bad idea right now. Probably a bad idea anyway, but really bad idea right now because they found live H5N1 cultures in unpasteurized cow's milk. October of last year, California had reported 93 outbreaks in dairy herds, nearly doubling in a week. That's how fast this bug moves. It's devastating. Anybody who's raised poultry, especially chickens and turkeys, knows the rate at which this bug spreads. You've had cases among dairy farmers. It's a very disconcerting situation. This is a CDC map from April, early April, which shows you the states that have had outbreaks of H5N1 in cattle, beef and dairy. You see California leads. I believe that is, Colorado over there, Texas. Fortunately, you don't see Florida in there. That's good news. But you get an idea how this is spreading. H5N1 comes in different variants or clades, as they call it. And there is another clade of H5N1 now, and it too is infecting dairy cattle. That's from CIDRAT in Minnesota. They do a great job of covering these different diseases. Barty asked me to put this slide in because this is pretty interesting. You say, well, what are we doing about this? This is a Wall Street Journal article from just a couple of days ago. Out in the West, they're actually tagging cows with sensors. And we were joking that the originator, the inventor of this had to have been, in a pub crawl once, and imagine wearing a sensor and say, you're staggering, you need to stop drinking. Well, they can monitor the cow's behavior. They can monitor the cow's vital signs with these tags, and they're able to isolate the cows that appear to be acting strangely. I have no idea how acting strangely is for a cow, but I would speculate that means that they're wandering aimlessly, they're not eating right, they are not exhibiting the symptoms that normal cattle and dairy cattle would exhibit. It's a fascinating, at least science is trying to help these farmers cope with this incredible problem right now. H5N1 in America and poultry. Okay, now, this is a very recent CDC map, early April, showing you all the counties in the United States that have reported H5N1 in birds. Gee, look at Florida. We've got a little issue here in the state. You see that that's mainly along the I-95 and I-4 corridors and I-75. So it's central and southern Florida for the most part, except for what appears to be maybe Duval County. I'm going to toggle back and forth here. This is a map of the Arctic, of the waterfowl flyways of North America. There's your counties with bird flu in birds, and there's your waterfowl flyways. This is how bird flu is transmitted. Wild birds, they head north in the summer. In the case of the Northern Hemisphere, it's the Arctic Circle. In the Southern Hemisphere, you know, down near Antarctica. And they engage in what I call birdapalooza. They get together, exchange their stuff, and knock themselves out. And then when it starts getting cold, they head south for the winter, right? Just like people from New York or something. And so what you've got here, you see the flyways. The flyways and the cases of bird flu in poultry are hand in glove. That's not a surprise, really. But what is a surprise is how this bug is spreading to mammals. This is a British publication. They now have detected H5N1 in sheep. That particular SIDRAP story, I've highlighted it there in red. They've had H5N1 bird flu detected in backyard poultry flocks in Broward County. So here's how the bug is evolving. It has infected, obviously, wild birds, but also mammals such as seals, bears, domestic cats, and of course, we've talked about cattle. So migratory birds remain the primary vector, as we just discovered, but this bug is affecting mammals now. Now that's bad news for us because we're mammals, and you know there's a certain evolution that takes place in these viruses, and science today says that we may be about 2 revolutions away from more efficient human spread of this bug. Now, as we've talked about, there have been some people in this country who have been infected by H5N1. One has died, was not a poultry worker or a cattle worker, interestingly enough. So we have to be very vigilant about this right now. If you feed your cats raw cat food, you need to be aware of this story. They found I believe it's Savage Cat or something like that. They found H5N1 in raw cat food. And so the manufacturer had to pull every can off of the market. So once again, that doesn't go through a cooking process, and it is infecting our pets. Now this, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to launch this. If I can't, then we'll just go on. This is Nature magazine from April of 2006. This is a graphic illustrating how fast a pandemic could move through the United States. If none of that is turning red, then I'll just vector you down to the maps on the bottom. And you can see that 70 days into a flu pandemic, a severe flu pandemic, most of this country has been immolated. So, armed with all this information, we say, okay, what can we do as individuals, as business owners, as corporate heads, as agency heads, or as healthcare professionals and so on? We know that SARS-CoV-2 killed a little over 1 million Americans. It just absolutely roiled anyone who was unprepared for that. Anyone who didn't sit through the presentations. We experienced pandemic fatigue. We heard about bird flu in '05. We started getting ready. That's when I started getting ready. We had a pandemic, and it turned out to be kind of a wussy pandemic, thank goodness. And so we experienced pandemic fatigue, and we let our guard down, and we didn't remember the lessons. The 3 pandemics a century on average, one of the 3 will kick our butts. And we lost that until SARS-CoV-2. The wake-up call in the spring of 2020, I think we all agree would be brutal. So, first thing that I would say is to relive in your mind what we went through with SARS-CoV-2. Remember that COVID pandemic. Remember how unprepared a lot of us were, and what we need to do. The first thing is that I would say, the old standby, just always have some personal protective equipment on hand. Just, hurricane season, we throw a lot of canned goods in, we get a lot of bottled water, we fire up the Jenny, things of this nature. We prepare for a natural disaster in this state because it always finds us. Well, pandemics are pretty much the same way. So one thing that you would want to consider doing is looking at your inventory of personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, and seeing exactly where you are for you and your family, your corporation, your business, your agency, and so on, your NGO. The big lesson coming out of SARS-CoV-2 was the supply chain. The supply chain wobbled. There are elements of the supply chain that collapsed. In a 1918 type pandemic or worse, the supply chain is just, ladies and gentlemen, going to fail. It's gonna drop off. The just-in-time supply chain is the enemy when it comes to pandemic preparedness, because you can't rely on your usual suppliers. I actually had a discussion once with Michael Dell on pandemic preparedness. And I said, Mr. Dell, what are you guys doing to be able to keep making Dell computers? And he said, well, we remember SARS, and so we have a factory at this time, late 2000s. We have a factory in Ireland, a factory in China, and our plan is to rotate production between those 2 factories as the bug progresses and moves from one continent to another. And then Michael Dell paused and said, Scott, what do you think? So I said, well, that sounds like a pretty good plan, but we all have suppliers upstream and downstream. Survey them, ask them, again, what are you doing to make sure that I can get my stuff or I can deliver my stuff if things go south real quick? And if they cannot articulate their plans, find not necessarily new suppliers, but find additional suppliers to be able to keep you going, keep you in business, keep your organization functioning. And then, go into your coup plans and update your pandemic supply chain workaround tab. I would, you don't want to be alarmist. You don't want to be the boy who cried wolf or, fire in a crowded theater or anything like that. But, the headlines are on us. There is awareness of what's going on. People know, geez, look at the price of eggs, well, golly, we know why. Bird flu. Bird flu is the exact reason why your eggs went up so much, and there were shortages of eggs. My son and his family live in Atworth, Georgia. They didn't have eggs for a month. At Publix, any of them, or at Kroger, nobody had eggs in the Atlanta metropolitan area. So you want to make sure that the people who you work with or work for, or the people who work under you, have an idea. You need to go ahead and kind of dust off those COVID plans and take another look at it. We all know about protective actions. I don't think I need to go through that slide. But crisis communications. One of my mentors is a guy named Peter Sandman, who does crisis communications in pandemics. And this is from Dr. Sandman. He says, be honest, be forthcoming. Don't give false assurance. Give people a sense that they can conquer this problem, and be honest. And then you can once again, you can leverage this. What we used to say was if you had your maximum property damage event over here, which for Floridians is a hurricane, and your maximum loss of life event, which is a pandemic, and you were sufficiently aware and protected and ready, or you, with all due confidence, you're ready. Anything in the middle is cake. You can pretty much knock anything else out. And so, but just remember the lessons that were learned from SARS-CoV-2. Update your COOP plans, your disaster recovery plans. Update your pandemic plans, and remember that influenza is different than SARS-CoV-2. It behaves differently, but it could be a devastating virus. So the WHO says that a pandemic strain of influenza, if it hits a major metropolitan area, it'll be in your back door by 21 days, 3 weeks. So for us, that would be Jacksonville, that would be Orlando, that would be Tampa, or Atlanta, Miami. You got 21 days. So that's why it's so important that you engage in this planning now. Also, gee, guess what's going to happen? Remember toilet paper? Why did we do that? We got a respiratory bug. Why did we go out and buy 180,000 rolls of toilet paper? I have no idea. That's just how we behave, I guess. No, I'm not encouraging you to buy those moon suits. But it's important for you to have context on this bug. We used to say, gain global context. Well, global now is, hey, what's going on in Milwaukee? What's going on in Phoenix? Kind of a thing. What's going on with the bug? I'd Google bird flu maybe once a day, or bird flu US, and just see what the Sam Hill's going on in this country with the bug. You need to know how to interpret the warning signs. The warning signs when things are really starting to get a little scary, like an ashen-faced news anchor or something, when they're talking about this. But if you hear the words sustained human-to-human transmission has occurred, especially in this country, then as we say at hurricane season, with a storm 48 hours out, rush to complete your preparations. That means do your hurricane kit. In this day and age, don't let your hurricane kit go after December 1st. Keep your hurricane kit exactly where it needs to be. Also, lay in medicines that treat the symptoms of influenza, Gatorade, diarrhea medicine, chest congestion, this sort of thing. Now, the last bullet is ask your physician for advanced stockpiles of antivirals. Now, I'm going to, I know the medical community is here, and they'll grade me on this slide right now. There are 4 frontline antivirals for influenza. I mentioned we've been working on this for a long time. The first one is Tamiflu, which is Oseltamivir. Normal course of treatment is 2 pills a day for 5 days. Prophylactically, meaning you're treating yourself so you don't get it, 1 a day for 10 days. Tamiflu, Oseltamivir is a generic. Tamiflu is the brand name. All of these medicines are available by prescription. So you have to talk to your physician and determine the comfort level with you and your physician for just kind of laying in a supply of these things. I was blessed to have a physician. I still have Tamiflu in my sock. By the way, you keep Tamiflu in your sock drawer. You don't put it in the fridge, and you don't put it in the medicine cabinet. Keep it in a sock drawer. Zanamivir, which is Relenza, is an inhalant. If you're sick, that ain't gonna do you a bit of good because you won't be able to get the particles down deep enough in the lungs. Peramivir is an injectable, usually only administered in hospital situations, which I completely understand. And then the new one, Zofluxa, which is Baloxavir, which is a one-shot pill. I have no experience with that pill at all. I just throw it in there because that's the latest weapon in the arsenal. These medicines, ideally, your doctor will tell you should be taken 48 hours after the infection sets in. However, even in a flu epidemic, try to get Tamiflu when you know that you've got the bug. It's very, very difficult. So you have to find your own comfort level. In foreign countries, it's available over the counter. But it's interesting, especially in Japan, there were problems with everybody just taking Tamiflu, like it was a cough drop or something, because it gets into the water supply and the wild birds drink the water, and all of a sudden they're producing Tamiflu-resistant flu. So that's why we need to have guardrails on the use of these antiviral medicines. I would also recommend, I think every doctor would recommend that you get your pneumonia vaccine, your PPV. And I don't know how often you need to get that anymore, but you should check with your doctor or your pharmacist and see if you can get a PPV vaccine, your pneumococcal. Very important because the principal byproduct of influenza is pneumonia. Your seasonal flu shot is also very important. And you should get your flu shot every year. For those of you who can't get egg-based vaccines, there are cell-based vaccines. Those are usually available at stores such as Costco and Walmart. I get the cell-based vaccine because it's called quadrivalent, meaning there are 4 types of flu that thing will help safeguard against, 2 A's and 2 B's. But you want to stay on top of that. Suggesting reading materials. I've lectured with Professor Berry on many occasions. He's a professor of history at Tulane. He wrote the definitive book on the 1918 flu pandemic called The Great Influenza. He has he's updated it in softcover with a new afterword on how COVID-19 compares to the 1918 flu pandemic. I strongly urge you to read this book. And I've got to plug my guy, Mike Osterholm. He's got a new book coming out next month called The Big One, How to Prepare for World-Altering Pandemics to Come. And then I have my blog site. I don't blog that frequently, but I do know that Dr. Julie Gerberding endorses my blog. God bless her. I was actually, how am I doing on time?
Over.
I'm over? Okay. So I won't tell you about how I found out Dr. Gerberding loves my blog. I was in the audience when she referenced it. And now, if we have time, I'm happy to take questions. We have time for one question. I knew this would happen, and I apologize. One question?
Would you be willing to stick around?
Yes, sir.
You advise a lot of work people, and you gave some advice to us, and thank you for what you do. One word that didn't hear come out was public trust. I was wondering if you could talk about that and how that plays a factor in preparing for.
Well, and I will stick around afterward to answer any individual questions. It's very important. We have the CDC. We've got state health departments, county health departments, and the like, and they're going to be at the forefront of how we deal with this. I think the public trust is still strong. I would trust the CDC with what they might come out with. Obviously, I have had a very good relationship with the CDC over the years. But it's also important to, there's an old Sinbad movie I reference here, which is the tagline, and that was "Trust in Allah, but tie up your camel." And so you do have to take some personal responsibility and see exactly what is going on. The media, such as it exists today, is going to be a good source, but you also have to do a little bit of digging and see exactly what's going on in the community, in the state, and in the country.
Mr. McPherson, thank you so much for sharing what is a sobering and makes me regret the choice of chicken as the lunch meal. But on behalf of the Economic Club of Florida, we've got a token of our appreciation. Thank you very much for sharing
Oh,
your
thank
wisdom
you.
with us.
Thank you so much.
If properly cooked to a temperature of 165 degrees or greater, chicken is perfectly safe.
Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.